I'm Joe Glenton. Welcome back to Warrior Nation as we embark on Season 6. We are the only podcast offering a critical lens on militarism in the UK. In this series, we'll be speaking to experts from around the world about the future of war in an era of rapidly shifting power and technology. The future of war is coming, but the future is also already here. In a world which looks more insecure by the minute, platforming and enabling anti-militarist discourse is more important than ever.
Recent weeks have had an eerie quality as the US government seemed poised to launch a new Middle East war with strong echoes of Iraq 2003. That the look of international politics begs a lot of questions is an understatement, and one of those questions is about accountability. I found myself asking, would we be here today if there had been any sort of accountability over Iraq? Of course, it's quite possible we would be, and in the sense of accountability, we may now be in a worse position in terms of, for example, the enforcement of international law, Gaza being the case in point, but also in other ways, like the rise of new forms of weaponry and technology in the course of the forever wars, autonomous weapons and drones among them. To discuss these, we're joined by Chris Cole from Drone Wars and Elizabeth Miner from the advocacy group Article 36. So it's great to have you both on. Thanks for joining us on a Friday as well, with so much going on in both of your work, I'm sure. I just wanted to start with let's get down to some layman's terms, and I include myself very much in that. I have an eye on this stuff, but you guys are the experts, obviously. So we had an exchange earlier, Chris, and you were talking about the fact that drones, this term that's kind of thrown around a lot, now includes a whole range of different systems. And I can remember being a young squaddy in Afghanistan, and the Predators, which it wasn't widely known they were deployed then, were going up and down the runway, and you'd hear this noise, which was eerie even when they're kind of quote fingers on your sides, as it were. And I suppose to me then that was what a drone was, and maybe that's the popular image of a drone is this kind of wasp-like buzzing thing high in the sky. And of course that definition has expanded quite a lot now. Could you just sketch out what that includes now?
I think you're right. I think the kind of drones really came into the kind of public consciousness, military drones, in the sort of early 2000s. I kind of came across them really in 2007, 2008. As you say, the UK purchased 10 Reaper drones, US Reaper drones, to use in Afghanistan. And that's the kind of like has been in people's mind for many years, but that's changed now over the last 5 or 6 years. Really, we've seen horizontal proliferation of drones, if you like, where they've moved around the globe. But we've also seen, particularly over the last 5 years, a kind of vertical proliferation of drones, where drones have kind of mutated and very much changed. So particularly, I think, what are called one-way attack, or some people prefer to call them suicide drones. And there are kind of a variety of different types of those as well. I guess the Shahed 136, which we've seen used by Russia, and the British press focus a lot on because Russia are using them. And that's called a drone. I'm not really sure whether that's a drone. It's more akin to a missile, really. But yes, a variety of one-way attack drones. And then, of course, there are the kind of smaller drones that are used for surveillance and reconnaissance, often flying, somewhere between 10 and 30, 40 kilometers. And those being armed in various ways. Non-state actors, ISIS, began to arm smaller drones, and the Ukrainian military began to arm small surveillance drones, and that's just kind of really kind of spread different types of drones. There's the kind of the Predator and the Reaper and the Turkish Bayraktar. Then there are the kind of one-way attack drones, which a lot of them are more akin to a missile, really. They're not really maneuverable by an operator during the flight. They're just launched and off they go. And then there are the kind of smaller, often armed now drones that can fly sort of a few dozen kilometers.
Yeah.
So that's a very broad, what would you say, categorization of drones.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I suppose to come to you, Elizabeth, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I look at drones and autonomous systems. I see them as something emerging, this technology emerging from the kind of morass of the war on terror. I may be wrong about that, but and I hope you'll correct me. But so alongside the development of drones, and they do interconnect at certain points increasingly, it seems to me. But what are the kind of implications, and how widespread are autonomous systems, which is your kind of specialism? How has that development taken place, and how widely spread is their use globally, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we're seeing is over the last, well, I suppose decade or more, an increasing number of countries have become interested in, increasing automation, autonomy in weapons systems. So, integrating functions, including with, more sophisticated computational and statistical techniques under the banner of AI into weapon systems, with the goal of, increasing speed in warfare, with the idea that this will give the sort of next either strategic or military tactical edge in warfare. And I suppose, autonomous weapon systems, as they're now maybe broadly understood internationally, is any system that after there has been human intervention or decision making can operate for a period of time and across a certain area or space without any further human input, and that in that kind of envelope of time or space, it will use sensors to sense the environment, calculate within the system whether objects, which could be people or physical objects, match a particular target profile that it's assigned to go and pursue, and if so, apply force, whether that's missiles or bullets or any other thing. So autonomous weapon systems could look like a drone, right? And I think a lot of drone technologies that are here already, you could easily make into autonomous weapon systems. Even flying a drone to a certain area, then the human leaves it to perform autonomous functions of strikes. Or it could be other kinds of systems like sentry guns on borders, for example, ground weapons, all kinds of things. And I think this is being pursued across sort of all domains by quite a few states, and increasingly explicitly as well. In terms of use on the battlefields, I mean, the definition I gave just there of an autonomous weapon systems, that does include, I suppose, quite a lot of existing and more basic systems, right? Like missile defense systems, or some loitering munitions that are in use at the moment. But I suppose our concern is with the next generation of autonomy and weapon systems, which could be used over wider areas and for longer periods of time, and that basically erode human control in the use of force, right? And entail this kind of, loss of control over weapon systems, loss of accountability, distance from human decision making in the use of force. And also it's very concerning to see, with a lot of the drive towards autonomy and AI in weapon systems and in military use more broadly, it is this pursuit of speed, which in itself entails an erosion of human control and deliberative decision making. And that's very dangerous for various reasons, from the kind of legal to the ethical to the risks of escalation. And also, I think, quite fundamentally, this question of should machines be sent out to kill people? And anti-personnel systems, I think, is a particular concern for us in this regard.
Yeah, I reflect now. I've got this question was originally aimed at Chris, but I suppose it applies to. There's a lot of crossover here. Maybe we can start with you, Chris. What is the driving appeal of, in your case, drone warfare? What does it give that other types of warfare don't, or what does it avoid? And I suppose in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the political cost of wars like Iraq and Afghanistan. Sure. Troops dead on the ground, that has a particular political impact in something approaching a democracy, which we have still. I mean, what are the other driving forces and factors behind this proliferation of drones? Again,
there are broadly three drivers. There's the military strategic appeal of drones. Drones, they can give you a lot more persistence in the air. So, I mean, typically a fast jet can really only stay in the air for about 7 or 8 hours, where the pilot is at their peak of ability to control this incredibly complicated machine, and so then has to come down. Whereas through using drones, where the operators are on the ground, you just simply change the crew on the ground. And so drones, the larger drones, the male armed drones, stay in the air now, 24, 25. The new drone that the Britain's just brought, the Protector, so-called Protector, can fly for 40 hours at a time. Wow. So is that persistence? That's a real strategic advantage the military see. That's one thing. Secondly is the economic advantage. If you take a crew out of the aircraft, that reduces the cost enormously. All the equipment that's needed in the aircraft to keep the pilot safe, to keep the pilot alive, you can just do away with that, and that drastically reduces the cost. And then third, as you say, the kind of political appeal of risk-free war, that you can engage in, you can use force at a distance without risking any of your own forces. Mm-hmm. And that, as you say, in democratic countries now is a huge appeal. There is a real problem with recruitment to the military forces. Mm-hmm. The opposition, and there's lots of saying we should do a huge amount more recruitment of military forces, but they simply can't. People don't particularly want to join. So I think that's one of the drivers towards the use of drones and automated systems is, not having to kind of risk or not having to recruit individuals.
Absolutely. Does that broadly align with your understanding, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'd say definitely, kind of both these trends, right? And the sort of force multiplication idea, like Chris is saying, and then, mm-hmm. Speed as well, like for thinking about autonomy and AI in weapon systems, there's this idea that, this is going to be the edge that will win the next war or that adversaries are pursuing. And so this is, where we have to do that. But back to your question about sort of, prevalence of autonomous systems and stuff so far, like in terms of this next generations of development, we're not quite seeing this on, the battlefield and in use yet. I think, there's a lot of claims from manufacturers regarding what autonomous weapon systems can do and how they can be, used with very little human control. But we're not seeing so much evidence of, that being able to be kind of operationalized yet. So we're still at a moment now, I feel, where we can, well, from our point of view as, activists and campaigners, set some standards and norms against the worst excesses of this trend that we're seeing.
Sure. So I have a briefing note in front of me, written by yourself, Elizabeth, which calls on, this was from the previous government, July last year, which calls for the UK government to break with the previous government in terms of a treaty, signalling intention to strengthen regulation and support the negotiation of a legally binding instrument in response to the UN Secretary General, who also called for that. How are we a year on from that? Is there any movements in terms of legislation and oversight and stuff like that?
Well, I suppose internationally, what I'd say is we're at a point now where, a majority of countries support the idea of an international legally binding instrument on autonomous weapon systems. So I think around sort of 130 countries at the moment. As you mentioned, the UN Secretary General and the International Committee of the Red Cross are calling on states to negotiate this as soon as possible. And by 2026, we have a lot of support for this amongst, the tech community, faith communities, within civil society. And in international discussions at the moment, so autonomous weapon systems are being discussed in Geneva at the UN under a framework called the Convention on Conventional Weapons, which currently has a mandate to talk about draft elements for a possible instrument on this subject, right? So possible rules that could go in a treaty if that's what states decide to do through that forum. Now, we know that they're not going to negotiate a treaty through this forum, unfortunately, because it's a forum that operates by consensus, which various countries have been using in recent years to mean that they, have a veto. If there aren't developments that completely align with their national interests, then they'll just, break consensus, and a mandate or a report or whatever can't go forward. So nothing's going to happen there in particular in terms of actual negotiations on a treaty. But what we have seen there is a lot of development of kind of common ground on content of what could be in a treaty in terms of rules, particularly around keeping human control in the context of international humanitarian law. Now, this isn't the whole problem with autonomous weapon systems, but it is one part of it. This issue is also being discussed in other international forums. So there was some consultation days on it under the UN General Assembly, which is a forum that operates by majority rather than consensus. So that is a forum in which states could choose to negotiate a treaty if they wanted to. I think the position we're in now is that there are these discussions in Geneva. It's a bit, I suppose countries are seeing where that will go and how far it will get, and we're not seeing that there will be a move, this year or in the near future towards treaty negotiations. But this is what we're really pushing for as soon as possible. In terms of the UK government, I mean, they haven't changed their position since last year, unfortunately. We did hear the Prime Minister say at the UN General Assembly last year in September that he thought that, AI is being deployed in military contexts without agreed rules at the moment, along other problems he was talking about. And, this is a real issue that it's, very difficult to act on, but also very urgent and hard to ignore. However, we haven't seen a change in the UK government to take more leadership on this issue. But we feel that they should, and they also could, from their position in international discussions, I think, support some sort of legal rules based on the content that is on the table at the moment.
Sure.
So it's our job, I think, over the next year or so to be really encouraging this and trying to encourage the start of treaty negotiations on this issue.
Sure. Is it going to be a case, I suppose, I don't know what the rationale of the people who are making these decisions is. Is it a case that lots of other people are developing them, so we're going to? Is that your sense of what it is? Almost like kind of unilateralism and multilateralism in terms of nuclear weapons. I mean, is that a part of the discourse around this among states, do you think?
I think there's probably a bit of, states feeling that they don't want to tie their hands, right? So they want to see what's happening in terms of these developments, and maybe we'd, like a lot of these things. Obviously, the UK itself is pursuing a lot in the area of AI and autonomy. Saying in its public position that obviously human control over weapon systems is very important, and they don't want to develop fully autonomous weapon systems, but we don't know exactly, what that will mean on practice. So I think there's a bit on the part of more militarized states of wanting to be cautious about putting down legal rules in case they feel that that will restrict them in the future. But I suppose, from our perspective, obviously it's more important to put legal standards down before things are in widespread use and before you see the humanitarian harm that can result from that, and also the sort of strategic dangers that can be generated between states if you have these systems that can operate at a high speed between each other and there's not common understandings of how they might be governed or used. That creates a lot of danger of unwanted escalation between countries. So I think what we're pushing is also more recognition of this. It's also the case that some of the largest developers of autonomous weapon systems aren't keen on new international law, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So, for example, the US and Russia, for example, I think China obviously is also developing a lot in the space of AI and is favourably disposed towards negotiations on a treaty, but only if all countries are included. And I think at this stage, it's unlikely that you'd get a legal framework that all countries would sign up to. This is the case for, a lot of disarmament and arms control treaties, right? It's often the case that a majority of countries go ahead, even without a couple of the so-called major military powers, and set strong standards in order to draw those lines in international law, protect civilians from their own practice, and put pressure on others to join after a certain amount of time. So that is something that can be done on the subject of autonomous weapon systems at the moment. And again, what we would encourage as the next steps, right?
Sure. So I suppose my sense of that, again, yes, go for it.
I mean, I agree with Elizabeth on the need to have this process and manage this process at state level. But there is another factor here, a very dangerous factor here. I'm sure you'll agree, Elizabeth, is the kind of it's corporations and companies who are very much pushing this, and it isn't really states who are in control. Obviously, they're in control of treaties and negotiating treaties, but behind all this, corporations and companies, and some individuals that we know who run these companies are very much seem to be in control of and are very much against any, as you say, form of international controls over the development of these systems, and that's very dangerous. So we really have to challenge not just states but corporations as well in this area.
Certainly, yeah. And this is all, I suppose, it's all very current. The idea, the unaccountable or near unaccountable power of corporations. Who are we talking about, Chris? Who are the leading firms developing this stuff?
I mean, Elizabeth would know better, but there's companies like Palantir. Who else, Elizabeth?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you have a mixture, right, of the kind of big traditional arms companies working on autonomy and weapon systems, and then, like you're saying, Chris, some of these kind of newer sort of startup organizations. I think we've heard a lot of noise in the media, for example, from Anduril and with its figurehead Palmer Luckey, who says things like, I love killer robots, and people who want to ban them are making a big mistake and promoting this as something that we have to do in a very kind of a brash way, right? But other companies also lobbying in more subtle ways, but like Chris says, with a lot of money behind it and significantly influencing the discourse. And I think we've also seen a lot of, I suppose, smaller and startup companies going to Ukraine and obviously contributing drone technology, but also looking to sort of road test autonomous systems there. So I think there's a big kind of developing system of this at the moment, which, like Chris says, is very significant in the direction in which things are being pushed.
Sure. There's a sense I get, and we're meaning to get Anthony Lowenstein on at some point during this series to talk about his idea of the kind of Gaza as a laboratory for all kinds of weapons. I suppose Ukraine is that in a different way as well. Have you seen? I read an article yesterday about a long read in The Guardian about the deployment of particular kinds of autonomous drone type weapons. They almost seem sort of in the register of it's almost a missile and it has some kind of guidance. Is it the case that you've seen rapid developments emerging from particularly those two conflicts recently? That's a question for both of you, really.
Yes, certainly in the drone field, the innovation, if you could want to call it that, in Ukraine is startling, absolutely startling how things have changed over the last 3 years. I mean, they're talking about using 100,000 drones per month. Yeah,
and these are kind of throwaway like fire and forget type drones. Is that right? The way you can
absolutely, and it's even changing as we speak, because counter drone systems are very much on the rise as well now. So we're putting, the UK in its strategic defence review has talked about how much it wants to put drones and AI at the centre of UK military forces. But drones aren't our saviour. There are thousands and thousands of drones being used in Ukraine that just crash or are just brought down.
If you'd like to keep up to date with our work, you can sign up for our free monthly newsletter and follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky. See the show notes for more details. So I think we might have touched on this before, but it'd be good to unpack it a little bit more, Elizabeth. How central? Obviously, I'm working my way through the couple of recent, the security review and the defence review that have come out recently. But how central to kind of British military planning, and maybe in globally, indeed, to the plans of states going forward strategically, is our autonomous weapon systems? Can we tell from what they're saying in documents like this? Can we get a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general sense that we get is, again, that, states are thinking that this is the next revolution in warfare, the thing that they need to pursue for military edge and things like that. And generally that there's a lot of buzz around, new technologies, right? So AI and autonomy, but also, cyber, quantum, like whatever. And you see in the UK documents a lot of pledge to invest in these, and that, this is the future, this is what we need to pursue if we're going to be warfighting, in the coming years and that sort of thing. So I think Chris and Drone Wars might have done a bit more work on, looking at how much sort of money and what kind of companies and stuff are involved in this. But I think, we can say that definitely this is something that, the UK government is very interested in and is pursuing, and has a policy framework at the same time in relation to, the need to maintain context appropriate human judgment and control in the use of force and over autonomy in weapon systems, but fleshing out exactly what that means and how much of a kind of safeguard that's really going to give is a point of concern for us, isn't it? And the fact that they're not willing to engage in a discussion about international legal standards on this is quite a concern.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Chris? Are you on the same page?
Yes, and I think it's important to be aware. I'm sure Elizabeth will say this as well, that it's not just a kind of robot. When we talk about autonomous weapons and we talk about the military use of AI, we kind of think about a weapon system. But there's a lot of dangerous use of autonomy and AI systems in the military kill chain that aren't like that. Like we've seen very much over the last year or so in Israel, how Israel has used AI data systems like Where's Daddy and Lavender and all these other systems, for command and control and target acquisition, all this kind of stuff, which is pre the drone or whatever it is being flown out, and all this stuff needs to be looked at and challenged and investigated as well. And I'm not. I mean, is that stuff part of the treaty negotiations as well, Elizabeth, or is that separate?
Yeah, I suppose, the discussions on autonomy and weapon systems in particular now are quite narrow to this idea of systems that, once there has been human intervention, are operating, in time and space without further decision making, right? So these AI decision support systems that you're mentioning, Chris, like for target suggestion and whatever, I think the reporting we saw on their use in Gaza suggests that these were used with very minimal human input and deliberative decision making, right? So someone has 20 seconds to approve or not a target, which is then sent to a drone or a fighter or whatever to strike. That's not really a meaningful level of human control, and that's extremely concerning and unacceptable, really. But that wouldn't be an autonomous weapons system, right? Because it's not a kind of closed system of all those elements. So with those things not being maybe part of the autonomous weapons systems discussion, I think certainly what we need is, I suppose, a whole kind of set of responses to all these elements of a wider picture of concern, right? There's autonomous weapon systems, but there's other uses of AI and autonomy, these decision support systems, how these things also piece together to, mass surveillance, for example. All these things kind of connect to each other and can be component technologies of a full autonomous weapon system, or they can be something very concerning on their own. So I agree with Chris that there's a kind of holistic response that's needed here, of which the autonomous weapon systems conversation only really touches one part.
Absolutely, yeah. I wanted to. It's become increasingly of interest to me, this idea, particularly in you see stuff like I've watched as a veteran technologies coming back home. Whether it's here or in the US, back to the West, whether that is police driving around in mine-proof vehicles or looking like soldiers, or we see it now with ICE in LA who look very militarized. This idea of an imperial boomerang, which is from a Naim Césaire essay from many years ago, the idea that some of this comes home. Are we, for both of you, I think, are we seeing, I suppose I can think of examples like drones overflying the channel and maybe like kind of militarization of borders in Europe to stave off an influx supposed of refugees. What kinds of ways are these technologies starting to express at home or on the frontiers, quote fingers again, of Europe? Are we seeing that? Is there evidence that that's happening beyond, what I've just mentioned there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of drones, a big decision that has happened in this last month is that the Civil Aviation Authority has given permission to the UK MOD to allow it to fly the new Protector drone, which is a kind of updated version of the Predator in UK airspace, unsegregated. So it can fly anywhere now in the UK state, which the previous Reapers could not. Yeah. But Protectors now will fly directly from Waddington and can be used. And they've talked about, the use of Protector for military aid to civil authorities.
Okay.
And I think that at times of crisis, we will see drones being used much more here in UK. Yeah. And as you say, they were used. Watchkeeper drones were used to monitor, or for a very short periods of time to monitor the English Channel. So we will see. But one of the things that I have to say, I'm astonished is that we have not yet seen a drone attack here in the UK from a terrorist group or a militant group, however you want to describe them. I'm really surprised that hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, we saw just a few weeks ago drones being smuggled across the border and the drone attacks in Russia.
Yeah, of course.
And, I am surprised we haven't seen something like that here yet. And I think, to be honest, it's only a matter of time.
Okay.
Yeah, and in terms of autonomy, I mean, I think this just makes me think as well, it's quite a gap in the international conversation at the moment, right, of talking about non-conflict contexts and autonomous weapon systems, right? And I think, borders, security, policing, I think, it seems quite obvious to me that it would be entirely unacceptable to see autonomous weapon systems deployed in those kind of contexts, right? And that's something that, needs to be very clearly prohibited before it does come home. And like you say, it will be, first in line will be, like you said, the quote frontiers and in migration policing and this sort of thing. I mean, I think we've already seen in certain countries the kind of use of sentry guns that could be switched to an autonomous mode on very militarized borders, and it's not much of a step to to change that into using things in an automated way. Sure. And I suppose it's interesting also to kind of maybe think of it a little bit the other way around. I mean, I think all of us are increasingly seeing a lot of automated decision making in our own lives, right? And harm from that, like algorithmic harm from decision making in anything from, finance to justice and policing. And I feel like, in a way, autonomous weapon systems, and particularly autonomous weapon systems used to target people, is a kind of sharp end of that spectrum, isn't
Sure.
it? If you're thinking about kind of connecting everything.
And doesn't Palantir have an NHS contract? I seem to remember. It seems that they're in every area of life. These big firms which are involved in AI,
which is quite interesting, isn't it? So there'll be decision making there, which some of us may be slightly concerned about. And this is a company that's always also selling a lot of military technology. And I feel like if we also can't sort of prohibit machines killing people on the battlefield and autonomous weapon systems there, we need to address this sharp end, or where are we with all this other stuff of, less lethal decisions and things like that. So it's, I think key that we connect the dots on all these things and also get the legislative frameworks in place and get things right.
Absolutely. Well, you're both very succinct, so we've run through a lot of my questions, but I wonder if Chris, what can people do to? I guess this stuff is comes in and out of view. There's a lot going on, but I think people are aware. There's this kind of consciousness about drones now. People understand the image, even if it's in maybe a very simplistic way. What can people do about this stuff? Where can they go and find out more? And what can they actively do to get involved in advocacy about this?
I mean, it's a very difficult moment globally and in our country. I think a lot of people are rightly focused on the situation in Gaza and focusing campaigning efforts around that. And obviously, we've seen over the last few weeks both Israel and the United States attack Iran. So in some senses, talking about drones and maybe even, I don't know, Elizabeth, talking about autonomous weapons is not necessarily at the forefront of people's minds at the moment. But the development of these systems is pushing very, very rapidly and pushing very fast. And our government is talking now openly about saying not that we're at war, but that we're in a war situation.
Yeah.
And that the public have to get used to wartime, and they're talking about having an annual day now where people prepare for war. That just came out in the national security strategy document in the last few days. So we're really seeing a kind of militarized culture growing in our lives, something that I didn't think we would see in our lifetime, but it's really coming back now, and it's extremely worrying. And I think the only thing to do is to build community, build local groups, build resistance in all sorts of ways. Even just talking with friends and neighbours and families about these issues. We live in a very small town down here in Dorset. And my wife does a monthly Women in Black vigil.
Okay.
And it's astonishing how many people come up and say how much they support what's going on. The kind of understanding that there is a real massive difference between what we're hearing in our media about how much people support the government's, the need to remilitarize and huge increase in military spending at the cost of welfare, at the cost of the aid budget. There's a real difference between what we're hearing in the media about and from the government about that and people on the ground. So we need to just kind of talk to people and reassure people and remind people that we're looking for a different way, that we're trying to build a different world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Elizabeth, I wonder what you think, because obviously at Forces Watch, a lot of our focus it's on recruiting and stuff like that, but it's also on militarism more broadly. And when I look over those documents and I see these terms like whole of society effort, we're on a war footing, and some of it is probably Keir Starmer channeling this kind of crude blitz spiritism, and that seems to be part of his brand, right? But what do you think when you doing the work you do, and then you hear that stuff? I mean, how does that make you feel? Is that this? It almost seems this intensification of militarism in our society.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing that, right? And like Chris said, and would agree with what he said, it makes it a very difficult moment for I suppose challenging all this stuff, right, and drawing attention to how, I suppose, we talked about AI systems in Gaza earlier, and we've already seen them make a contribution to the huge harm there, right? So this is stuff that's already showing how showing its dangers, like to civilians and to society in general. So I think at this point, I mean, like Chris said, it's a lot of kind of developing understandings of the trends of where things are going. It was obviously striking but not surprising in the recent Strategic Defence Review, for example, that this is all about how we should be fighting the next war, but nothing about how we should be avoiding being in conflicts and building better international frameworks and cooperation and things like this.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a big job for all of us to be sort of, I suppose, building these ideas of that there's alternatives and that ways to keep us safe kind of at home and internationally, and keep the world safer and make the world a safer place involves de-escalating all of this, essentially. In terms of the issue on autonomous weapon systems and what people might be able to do in particular, I mean, both our organisations, mine and Chris, is a part of a campaign called Stop Killer Robots, which is
great campaign.
Global. Yeah. Who knew that we thought that we would have to do such a campaign? But anyway, and this is a global coalition of NGOs. So organisations can join this and be part of the work that's going on there. But also, I think for individuals, there's actions. A lot of kind of, I suppose, quite standard actions, but things that are always important to do, right? Like petitions and writing to parliamentarians about this issue, like telling your MP that this is something that you care about and you want the government to be doing a particular response, rather than just walking down this road of pursuing autonomy and AI and militarism without I suppose, the kind of regulation on that we need to see. So I think there's a lot that we can do individually and collectively, and in these kind of very difficult times, it's just up to us to keep on doing the work and doing it together and building our movements and understandings, right?
Absolutely. Well, we're coming towards the end, but Chris, any closing thoughts?
Oh my goodness.
The pressure's on.
I'm just trying to think what's coming up. I mean, I think showing up at things is always important. I think all of us get energy. It can be sometimes difficult showing up to another march, showing up to another demo, showing up to another vigil.
Yeah.
But it's important to show up, and I think showing up is something that we all have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Catherine, you're on the same page there? People need to get out, do stuff. I remember Loki once told me organise in person was the best bit of advice I ever had. Yeah, are you on the same page there?
Yeah, and I think as well, I think for all of us in our, advocacy work and stuff as well, like it's a moment, like we've been saying, right, where I suppose that there's a rollback on the idea of international law and standards as something that protects us and that keeps us safe, and this kind of defaulting to the idea that less rules and more military technology, no matter what harm that causes, or how much military utility it actually has. We just have to pull out all the stops and and get everything that we think will give us an advantage. And I think it's very important to be pushing back against that in this moment, because we know from past experiences that isn't something that contributes to long-term peace and security, obviously, right? Like revolutions in warfare have not gone well for civilians in general. We know that indiscriminate weapons like landmines persist for years after a conflict has ended. This is why we ban these kinds of technologies.
Yeah, there have been successes, right? There are successes we can point out with these kind of technologies, right?
Yeah, and that have saved tens of thousands of lives, and this is why we've done them and why we make these kinds of rules, right? It's not for this particular moment and what we think might give us the most advantage, but also for thinking about the long term. And I think that's just very important for us to be putting into these conversations and keeping in mind, like what do we really want in terms of security and security for people in the long term. And I don't think it's a world in which there's more technologies with which we can kill each other quickly. I don't think that's going to be the security that we need, essentially.
No, fully agree. Thank you both for coming on. It's been really insightful. We're going to wrap it up there. If you enjoy what we produce and would like to support us to make more of it, then you can help us keep making Warrior Nation for as little as £2 a month via our Patreon, or you can support us through our donation page. And if you'd like to keep up to date with our work, you can sign up for our free monthly newsletter and follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky.